Aloha and Happy New Year. My name is Artisan. I'm here today because I actually want to do a couple things to explain a new art form I created. In this sense, I want to take a construct, and in this case, we're going to use the alphabet to create a better understanding of why these symbols arise into waking reality. Why do we utilize them? Where do they come from? At the same time, too, how they've changed over time versus how they were initially intended tend to form part of the analysis. But as an artist and creative, one of the biggest things that helped me re-understand it was breaking it down and actually applying the nature of what it is actually meant to convey, not only by the functional state, but by the letter, the spell, and however else that you are coordinating these lines and circles and shapes. Because it's important that we recognize the direction of the line. As in English, it is, as you're perceiving this video, it's probably perceived from here going this way. So I perceive it that way. Now, this video is perceiving this way, so it goes here to here. But when you take the language that I'm reading, turn it sideways up a waterfall, you see the directional of the energy. And when I say energy, it is the way that the ink is fixating itself to the paper so that it forms a more composite ink and non-ink parallel. Now, the thing is, when you are embedding these types of shapes, sigils, letters, even the alphabet, you are putting together a series of directions. And each letter actually creates a function that we can use to understand any word, any title, any name, any meaning, just by deconstructing it. So I call this the art of symbolism. Now, today specifically, I'd like to focus on the alphabet. And I'm going to go through letters A through Z and better understand it so you can see and interpret a visual way of learning this concept. Because I spoke about it previously in my podcasts about utilizing examples and going through it all, but this is a more organized, you can say it's a classroom, but this is more of not even a presentation, more of an explanation. We're going through the process and it's at your own pace. And I'm working on currently creating some sort of educational tool to aid individuals. And I'll expand on it too, because there's a lot to be spoken about. And at the same time too, by providing it as simple and sophisticated as I can, I'm creating a new set of tools that then can be advanced upon. Now, I know that you can apply this to AI, you can apply this to any model, you can apply this to your own physical body, as well as your own emotional state, the experience, the understanding, the different languages. It doesn't even have to abide by English because of how heavy letters have been used to decipher and carry the understanding of what is created. Now, let's take a look at the letter. And letters in the alphabet are created in an energetic sense because it's directional. So if I was expressing out into the world, there is a way in which my mouth would have to form different layers. There is a top, there is a bottom, there is a center. Now, there's the way in which we can close our mouths. There's a way in which we can project from the back. Now, there's enclosures, there's open ways and pathways in which we are moving breath itself as a method to convey and create shape. You distort this reality and then interpret it into a form of sound. But in reality, that function speaks like an art and speaks like a dance, a groove. And when you're doing it, we are utilizing that same function, whether our intention is emotionally behind it or not. And I think when we're using this as an educational tool, we want to look at it as an analytical construct. But the way I even create this construct is taking something that exists already and going about it in a more creative, I guess you can say, feminine pathway, where you're trying to have it unfold onto itself. I call this, usually through the art of synchronicity, I call this unraveling, arriving into, because we need to recognize that we're not right, we're in the right place at the right time, but we don't have to be aware. Now, if you take a concept of symbols and you create a system that allows you to deconstruct anything, you don't need a complex computer to understand anything in the universe. You don't need a complex computer to do anything, really. You can create your own AI by understanding the same basic principles that were created by those that could be seen as a golden age, but it's the concept of conveying as an art form. So for me, the art of symbology will ultimately show us through the various different line work, circles, all that. Its functions. Now, I apply this to just as much as planetary sigils and alchemical sigils that perform the same types of function, but that's a more advanced usage of these types of models. But today, I want to focus on the alphabet. Now, to apply this, you have to just take any word. I don't care what subject it is. I don't care the nature of present, history, future, potential, made-up word. Go ahead. You can break down the synchronicity. Why is that word here? Why is this encountering? You can apply these same principles to the nature of even dreams, because the symbols, when you're in a dream, provide an emotional vehicle for an expression to unfold into reality and an experience through the witness of you as the I am. So when we're actually working with this, you need to take your own personal path, and just like AI being able to serve itself as a tool for anyone able to computize it, this simple thing is going to allow you to take any word and truly understand it. And I'll explore that on maybe separate videos later down the road. But this is the first introduction to it. And as I create these tools, I want to ensure that this is an open source educational, take it and roll with it kind of construct. But I want to make sure that this is blossoming into the world. This is personal to me. It's a passion, because I enjoy seeing the beyond and then being able to create a way for people to experience what that is. And even if I'm not able to explore it myself, the more that those are willing to explore in their own individual path, the more that those are accounting for universe itself experiencing the expansion. Now, you can say that as an expansion or a discovery or a way in which we are just coming to awareness or process of energy, light, the way of communication that are currently in our wavelength at the present now, the ever-present, I don't know how you describe and that's another thing too, because everyone has their own way of putting together perspective. They're not always gonna fit it together. But I was in a situation where maybe my spelling wasn't the best growing up, and another weak link was my ability to pronunciate the word based off the spelling. But this gave me an advantage in this rediscovery in 2022 when I reconstructed this symbol of the alphabet so that it was better understood based off what I was seeing in Tartaria research, based off what I was seeing in scientific research, based off what I was seeing in Latin terms, based off what I was seeing even in my medicinal herbs and plant studies. Like all of that still correlated, plus astrological research, as well as going back to the myths and a lot of the ways in which of the time we have authors who are artists of words, and they create a whole lexicon of, you can say, poetry or even concepts of constructs that have come into the world. Now, this was organic because it was organically formed to create and take place versus AI today creating some sort of mishmash of things that we are expected to sound good. But expectation is the one thing you will learn is always not a constant. And we can't always have that expectation be there to limit us in the future. So we need to think beyond the boundaries. So without further ado, I'd like to go through the alphabet, and then you'll see for yourself how this works. Because in my eyes, the nature of philosophy, it should explain itself. So now to open up, I'd like to say that the English alphabet dominates with the letter E. I associate that with energy. The energetic potential in how you arrive at a function is how you can see the parallel of how all these symbols play together. And in doing so, you create the functions that exist in reality to explain themselves through natural philosophy. So with English, the letter E is very much the directory. It is the way in which energy is traveling, and its expression through the way in which we are emitting it through is both seen through the way in which we are shaping that into reality, just as much as it's expressing itself out into reality. And finding a common term to explain it all is why I created the art of symbology. So let's go through all of this. Let's see. Now, the letter A. The letter A, spelled A-Y, is added extent coming into reality. Now, we see this because if you notice right here at the top of the A, that would be considered the constant. It's also the angle, but it's the constant in which you can see what would be the beginning of the A, then extend out, and then exist. And now what exists between here, that added extent, symbolized itself into this letter. Now, when you see it arrive, there's a number of ways of interpreting it. For example, if it's after something, you can say the additive extent, or you can just say the extent. Now, in certain circumstances, like the letter H pre-existing the A, that also has parallel to it, because that's an existing extent versus an additive extent. We'll go into that when we get to the letter H, but no, in those circumstances, I don't repeat the word extent, I say additive. So that's why it shapes based off where you're putting them in between, because it's context. And for example, like say the English letter E dominates where energy is being propelled, just like a vowel is the expression of that energy and how it's propagated. So let's see. A, the additive extent. So B is blossoming. B-E-E. Most letters dominate with two E's as an energetic fractalization. Now, B arrives in B and an E, which is just B, which people take as being. But that is simply the blossoming of energy, I call it. People understand that it could be a division, but you're not dividing it, you're blossoming it, because when you split it like a flower and it blossoms out, that's what you see with the B. The B is that blossoming. It's that water fountain effect, but when you're blossoming, you have the effect to bring a curl in. So it's continuous, and you can bring it into a cycle, because then you're creating two paths, but they're symmetrical. Now we're looking at C. C with S-E-E is a transference of energy into. So it's continuous energy. Now I call that concentrate. Now, if we notice with the C, it likes to close in on itself and conclude and couple into. And in this case, that type of structure are two parallel directions. You're not creating a complete encasement in this example, but you're allowing it to become more closed in. This is creating more of a pressure chamber. Now, because of that, you see the energetic flow wanting to be coupled, being slowly pushed out, but that is a concentration. So when you see this, the letter C always tends to be that concentrate, that that purity, that a lot of itself, because it's coming into, it's carbon, So let's see here. D. Now, D is an encasement. I also wrote down here, it's a drum, because when you think of a drum, that's an example of D where you can see it in the world, because it's like a and when you have something solid, it goes and then it has the effect because it's an enclosed encasement. And when you have an encasement, you can and it will push it out into the world. So when you're encased in something, that is a layer of self-continuance. But because it comes with a line down the center of it instead of a complete circle, what you're seeing is two directions coming into, they've come into already, creating an enclosement of being. Now, this is where you get vitamin D3, this cubing of the D, this concept that you're coming into, this into form, into encasement, on way of your storing the energy and embodied it, That's why you see D as DEE, this energy that comes out still works like a drum, but when it's at the end, that's why it's encasing it into something that has happened, which is what we're seeing as a past of the ever-present. Now, let's move on to E, the most functional. I mean, obviously the vowels are all functional, but the most dominant understanding of all of these symbols, which is E, energy. This is the directional energy. Now, because when we say E, here's a great example. E, you're seeing the top of the mouth form, you're seeing the bottom of the mouth form, and then with your tongue, it's encased in here with that E. Now, when you're opening with E versus E, you're getting two forms of it. Now, that's why there's an EE and an EH. These are the energies continuing, and EH is the energies extent. So I wrote direct energy as my association to this type of symbolage because I'll categorize it exactly as energy, but it's a continuance of energy. It's a push of energy. It's why you see E followed by R as a directory, because when we get into R, that's driven. It is being propagated even further out there at a quicker pace than what the energy is existing as is. Think of this as like a chariot. It is the way in which energy is flowing in the water, in the river. You see that ER present. Now, let's see here. Next letter is F. And I associate F with transference. Because of the function, we see it transfer into. Now we see that through the waves, the function of the wave, and in which it continues. And when you're saying F versus F, there's two functions there. The F is where you have the curve and the lowercase. But the S is where you get the EF. Now in this is the energy coming into the function. That's why you're seeing it directionally, and then it's scooping up to come into. Now it's a changeover. It's form, but it's form of coming into. So it's the concept. So let's see here. Coming of, for example, when you get to O, that is the mittens. That's the way your field is being into the world. Now you're bringing that of, that means coming, what's emitting of what would be put in front of it. So that makes sense that it's coming into as one of those types of transferences. So G here, well known for, you can say, secret societies. I don't know if you call them secret, but it's the concept of Freemasonry. The use of the G is prominent because what you're seeing as G is generative. Now, what you see is the center of source coming out and expanding, and then from that expansion, spirals out into being. Now, that's why C is generative. Not only is it coming out, but then it's spiraling out. This is seen as a concept of putting something out there and then continuously creating a cycle out of it, and you're bringing it into being through that. That's why generative is so important. Now, I put this as a JEE, utilizing that, because when we get to J, which is sudden arisal, this is a sudden arrival, however, of energy, and it continues to emit, which is the double E. So in this case, H, as I said earlier, we see two of these existing. Now, these are creating individualized lines. These are extents. These are concepts between two points of interests. Now, what's happening between these two links, which is I associate with the I, is this extent. Now, that extent, whatever it may be, that's what H represents, why you see it as the 15th. When you see the TH, we see this representation of what comes to the point extent of that is, So it's the existing extent versus the additive extent. It's something that is showing you between these, this is how it connects. This is how it comes into. And this of what exists between these two is that function. And the spelling of H, A-Y-C-H, A, the extent, Y, into reality, C, concentrating H of the extent. Moving on to I. Like I said, I associate with link. It's a conscious connection. It's mostly associated with the individual, and it's giving EYE, energy, coming into reality, creating energy. So it's a continuance, but it's connection of that. So, for example, the us of us, I existing through the consciousness of I of the sun exists through into being. That is your link, and your link of yourself is the way in which we're propagating. Now, many people think of the word link, and I know one of the things that are propagated, I guess in nerd culture, is the concept of those embedded with the naming, how it plays out. Now, people think of something like the Triforce, and they think of Link, and they create this idea of hero's journey and the way of the connection. And when you start to play how these types of symbols orient themselves into reality, and you deconstruct them, you start to see that this same concept I'm explaining here arrives back into itself. Whether it was created eons ago, generations, golden ages, who knows? The way in which we're able to come full circle is why we're able to rebirth the function, rebirth the way in which we're actually captivating not only the potential present in each moment, but then utilizing a system to take it further. And that link of the past and the present is an accumulation of what we can work with. Unlike AI using data sets, we can work with our experiences and what we have throughout our existence. And that link is important because a conscious connection is this organic electrical magnetic drive of calibration within you yourself, driving yourself through the energy of soul, of the sun arising itself through you, through the way coming into our essence of presence. Describe it as earth, but even if we take the same symbology of energy arriving into the extent, it can still make sense. So moving on with J. Now, I mentioned earlier in G, J with J-A-Y is more J-A-Y versus J-E-E. J-A-Y is sudden arisal, extent into reality. Because you see here, it's a sudden arisal into reality. It's bringing it into, but it's just sudden bringing it into. It's like first starts off subtle, but then just rockets up. Like you can't prevent that kind of, it's there. So it's a sudden arisal. It brings itself into being as a momentum. It builds itself up and then gains it into a larger degree. So let's see here. K. Now K, through the function, is branch continuous. Now K, C, we get this K. But the thing is that continuation is still a branching here because what you have is the connection up and down. And then you have the first set continuing off. And just like a tree branch, you have the second set continuing off. So it has already branched. Now, in this case, that branching is why you have the word king you have this branching of individual or link continuing to generate. So, concept tree. L is your parameter. Now, you can put it local parameter, but what is local than perception relative? So it's really subjective. So parameter was always my gravitation, my magnetized, energetic expression when I was associating this concept, because it's coming into the world. First there's this, and then there's that. So you're creating the parameter. Unlike Y, which is using 3 to create into reality, L is creating that parameter. And it's spelled EL. So it's energy going into those parameters. This is why you even have those kinds of concepts in the first place, which is a whole other video altogether. Now, M, magnetize. You can do magnitude, you can do amplify, but magnetize is my association when I'm deconstructing multiple letters. Like E, M is how you say M. So in those cases, it's energy magnetize, energy imitate, energy. Get the concept? So it is allowing the concept of 2 divisions pointing out to expand this field around it through what is existing's extent. So it's something that already is providing itself. Now we'll get to W, which is an inner arisal versus this outer arisal. N, which is continuance, straight up continuance. I like spelling it this way versus other methods where you have this connection as the center, is a better understanding of showing why it functions this way, because it is emittance between 2 connectors of continuing to pass on to. This method here arrives you to see that it can come into and carry that continuance. And with the EN, it's energy continuing, which is the concept to push on forward, which can come enlightening or enlightening, however you want to place it at the beginning or the end. It's a continuance. Moving on to O. Now, O is OH. OH. So it's an emittance of extent. So emittance is what I associate as the O. It's always what feels best when I'm trying to describe what it's functioning as. Now, you can say onto expansive field, imagining your magnetic field or your aura or the torus field. Those kinds of concepts do help you shape how this emittance is happening, but emittance is more of a traversal of life force energy from a source. Emittance is that source having such an energetic extent that it's able to have processed field. So you want to look at it as an enclosure, because circles in nature are this idea of onto, like, the perception of the eye, the way we're shaping reality is through this inward take. So when you're looking at this emittance, you see this coming out of reality, and then you have this outer continuance of emittance, because you need to describe that it's not just solid, it's continuance. It's continuing based off the life force energy you can describe for something that's living or an organism. That's how you see that O play into case, just as much as it plays in ontology, ontological, oncology. You can see how the even ion, the existence of the link emitting continuously, it's that emittance itself is important, because you will see it continuously fractalize depending on how many letters you are producing in that one spelling of a word. So let's see here. P. P is propulse. Now look at this as a link connection of an individual. but it's the way in which you're projecting. It is the way in which projecting, not as a whole, but as a part. Now, this is a potential projection in my eyes, because you want to see the way it is pushed, it is pulled just as much, but it is the direction that it is not the full, but a part. So it's a propulse. So it's the way that you're pulling that energy out and through. So P is this continuance of that energy. So as you can see, it's the fractalization of E, which is why it's used as a propulse. It's a way of pushing. It's a way of directing energy. So now we're on to Q. Q, which spelled Q, more like a C-U-E, like you're queuing it up. This, or the Q to it, there's a way of pronunciating it, but the C is a concentrating and the U is coming from that concentration. E is the energy that is functioning from those two principles. So it's a continuance of that, which is why we have Q act just like a O, where it is a full circle, but we have a bridge connecting between it. I like to open that bridge in my illustration because you want to see it as a passageway that you can either let in or let out. Most cases, it's like a quirk. It is letting out. So I put this down as an ontological quirk. It's the way that it's arising out. It's something that is, when you're quick, you're pushing it. But every single time you have Q, you got to have the U, because U is a pulling of it. I describe that as a from word, because it has to exist from, but it's its onward from that. So it has to continue. So Q is that bridge. A described it as protus. It is the way in which it's pushing, but the way it's pushing is at a point, which is T, and then it arises from there. So that makes sense. Moving on to R. Now, R, mating, is driven. I like to see that as best place is like you're traveling on a planet and it's continuing down a path, but there's a path relative to what it's orbiting, right? Now, when it launches from that path between what's already there and the orbitry, that new path is that driven path. It is a propagated force. That means it's able to boost off this propulsion already existing, right? But it's able to kick off it and then take its own path. So it's driven in its nature. So A-R-E is the addition of an extent, driven energetically. See how that works? So, and with this, let me explain here. You see the same principles of P. You see the connection. You see that part pushing, but then you see this directional arrowing. This directional arrow is the main function. So when I see R, I'm actually seeing it drive. It's a direction. When you see it with an E followed by an R, it is an extra boost to the energy. It is pushing it forward in its own way. So S. Moving on to S, which is ES, energy into. So since this is energy into, it is a function. You can see it as an exchange, but I put spiral onto. It's the way it's exchanging this way. If you can imagine a yin-yang, that principle is the S. So you have two of them exchanging. So it's like an exchange of energy. One's going up while one's going the other way. It's a changeover, but it's more of a transference or transferative. But spiraling onto is that exchangeal where it can either continue on from there, or it's more of a spin where it's continuously changing, you know? And that spin through the center or through the exchange can birth what the S is providing. So that's S, which is why it's special. T. T, simple. To a point. You see this bar? When you say T, you see the closure of the T, you're bringing it to a point. And then when you have that point, that energy is coming into it. T. So T-E-E is that energy of a point positioning itself forward. So to a point, simple. Very simple. And I draw that with a T and the arrow coming up into it. So yeah. Next on, U. Now, U, I like to see U like this because it is coming of what was previous to it. Like I say, it's a partner for Q because it goes parallel to show you the function of Q while the pool of Q functioning is continuing. That's why you bridge it to something else, why you bridge it to a vowel to show how it's then expressing itself out and connecting to the word and forming the word. We'll get to the word in a second, but the word we'll get. But this is from word. This is pulling it from. I like to see that it's like bringing it in and pulling it so it can extend it. It's like a pregnant belly, birthing in the ability from what has previously come. Think of that concept, but it's an emergence. So it's comes into. And YOU, which is in reality emitting from that. So it's like this coming into and what's coming from that. V. V comes down and it reflects and comes back up. Now we can see V just like we see N. We can see V just like we see the word, or the letter A, I should say, upside down. And we can see it as directional, but we see this as more of a refraction of light. Now, a reflection of light bounces off and comes around. A refraction of light hits and then spreads. Now, when we see this on a flat surface, when we see a reflection, it is reflective continuous. So it has to bounce off and ricochet off. Now, this is why it's reflective, because it is coming from and to. So many of the ways in which we are having it come to express ourselves or bring it through an expression tends to use those types of things when we're looking expressive, or even the way that we are looking at the way it's even. It's energy reflecting onto energy continuing. So it's the way in which we can see even or odd emittance encaptured, encased. You can use encaptured with encased, but encasement, encaptured, whatever works for D. The idea is that it's an encasement of an encasement because we fractalized it. And VE, continuous of that fractalization of energy. So it's a continuing energy. It's when you're hitting a tennis ball and it moves forward. It already created the action versus it coming in to cause the action through energy. So when we're speaking, that's why we can drive and see this spatial energy through the oxygen and change or whatever the function of us expressing out and creating that sound wave. That is emitting for a good reason. And when you're reflecting that out, that's why it's a vowel. That's why it's vocalized. That's why it's when we vet something, when we verify something, we put that energy to make sure that it's like, what we want it to see. We want to make sure that reflection is helping us to discern what is present. It's a good C of symmetry, but it's also a good way of leveling. Like leveling, that's a good way of reflective because you see the beginning and the ending express the L. Now, it's the way in which one either is putting the form into the energy to reflect itself back into form. It's just the way that you're converging a way of creating something that is of two natures and then level in the middle. Speaks for itself. So anyway, moving on to W. W spelling, double. D as in encasement emitting with a U. So what's coming from that encased emittance is blossoming through the parameters with energy. And now that is with the U, which I explained through the U is the YOU, which is reality emitting and what comes from it. W is this inner arisal. Now, you can see the two links of the W having the ability, just like H and M, to create this extent of two links. But then where the energy goes is the coming together of the two, this arisal between these two forces to bring itself into being. And that's why this inner arisal of what is an essence. It's leading us into it. So this is why water is able to work together. So, next letter. X. X here, spelled ECKS, is energy concentrating, branching out into a spiral transference. Now, that's the function of what X is. I just like to summarize it as exchangeal or exchanged. This is easier because it has the word X in it, making it a little more comprehensible to see the coming in and coming out of the energy, even the meeting of the energy to reflect itself. This is more of a construct because X forms more of this coming together of different forces so that we can then meet and exchange and see parallels symmetrically on the other end of. But it's an exchangeal, so it's something into something else, most likely. Now moving on to Y. Now Y, like I said previously, is bringing self into reality. Simple, into reality. One way of understanding the function is the Trinity force. This triforce, this way of energy existing two paths, being able to expand or contract, is in the concept of the rails of Trinity. This is understanding that how you're forming three fields can create, you can say dimensional, because we associate with the three-dimensional, but this dimension in which we're giving form to is essentially expressing the energy out, and it's emitting, but its existence of a Y shows us how it can come into wall. It can also come out to. It goes both ways, which is why when I create the Y as my own art symbol, you see that at both ends of each coming together expresses a direction. And with Y, it's WHY. So this is the inner arousal's extent existing, coming into reality. And that's why we ask the question in the first place, because it has to come from us. It's a quest. So with the final letter, Z, which is simple. Now with Z, I clarify this as all-encompassed extent. So this is also an extent, but this is all-encompassing. This is the omega. This is trying to say everything from what has come to what is currently together as one. You know, it's the all-encompassing extent. Now, Z is continuance of the energy. So it's just trying to clarify that all this and more, you know. So with all that said and done, we've gone through each of the letters, and all of them here have a function. And creating this version of my alphabet was very explorative to then turn into a series of cards that I'm trying to bring into reality. And if you want to find more information on that, you can do so by following the link below. But a lot of the development of this was just working at it again and again, perfecting it. And I came across this in 2022, deconstructing some of my historical research, I should say. And bringing it together was one of the ways that many of us here, through a simple sheet, can learn this knowledge and apply this in a way that is so helpful for anybody. You can take this for any of the words I put together and deconstruct it. It's simple that you can do this with any food, any Latin name, any name to any program, to any association, even the usage of it unintentionally. Clarify a deeper meaning behind why that was attached to its existence. Why it's continuing is more proof of that as well. So I invite you to take this art of symbology and explore for yourself what it leads to. Thank you for tuning in, and as always, stay true.